Thank everyone for joining us. Let me open up in prayer. Father, we come to you in your Son, Yahushua's name. We give you thanks. We are here, Father, to learn from you, to learn from each other, to dig into your scriptures and commentaries, and to help come to the truth of what was written by your Apostle Paul. And Father, we look for your Holy Spirit to guide us. We look for your presence among us. We look, Father, for your word to be in our hearts, our minds, and upon our lips. And Father, just reveal the things to us that you want us to see today. And may you be magnified, may you be glorified in all that we say and that we do. In your Son, Yahushua's name, we ask. Amen.
May it be so. All right. Well, today we're going to start in the book, The Jewish Apostle Paul. And sometimes these kinds of courses can get real academic and get really difficult for the average person to relate to. So we're going to just read through Drosh style, the book. It is written by Dr. Eli Lazorkin Eisenberg, hyphenated name, and he is a Messianic Jew who doesn't share all aspects of doctrine with us. He comes from a background of the Torah is for the Jews, but we can learn from our brothers, and so I think it's important that we understand how a Jewish person, someone who grew up Jewish, understands the Apostle Shaul today. So, Mark, can you just tell our people a little bit about your background?
Well, shalom, everyone. My name is Mark Webb. I'm the pastor here at Living Messiah in Mesa, Arizona. I came to this current understanding and this current walk about 15 years ago. I'm a native New Mexico guy. My wife and I are both born and raised in New Mexico. I'm from Clovis. She's from up by Raton. I'm sure all of you know where that's at. We lived in Albuquerque for about 4 years, and in the mid to late 80s, we began this congregation about 12 years ago. I have 5 family members that are pastors in traditional churches in Texas. And so we've been studying in Drosh style to understand the scriptures from a Hebrew mindset, from a Hebrew lens. And so we're excited. And I'm thrilled to be doing this with all of you and with Pastor Randall.
Well, thanks, Mark. So let's just jump right in. And I guess, Dave, you will be scrolling for us, or you'll be scrolling. Okay. Just got to get my wits about me, you know? All right. So, was Paul right about women? Because I want to whet your appetite for the kinds of things you can expect to read in this brief study on Shaul, I've chosen to introduce this book with a challenge. It's a challenge to rethink one of the basic and most controversial beliefs we have about Apostle Paul, his attitude towards women in public ministry. And I think it's real important for us to understand that Paul wasn't against women, but certainly there were times when in our English translations it was a little difficult to figure out what he was saying, and obviously Kepha thought that as well, because he actually says, some of his teachings are really hard. So 1 Corinthians 14:34, the Apostle Paul's letter states, the women should keep silent in the assemblies, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says. There are several major problems with this statement. So, of course, everyone assumes that his statement about the law is referring to Torah. But as we read on, it will be evident that maybe we need to rethink that. So first, nowhere does Jewish law forbid women to speak in public gatherings. Paul, being a well-educated Jew, certainly would have known this. However, there was a Roman law on the books that forbade women to speak, to vote, and to exercise authority over men by holding public office. Wow, that's kind of a different thought than what we grew up with,
Yep.
for sure. And so, the words of 1 Corinthians 14:34 would sound far more credible if someone else other than the Jewish apostle Paul had written them. Second, on numerous occasions throughout his travel and letters, the apostle Paul affirmed the ministry of women, Romans 16, 1 Corinthians 16, Acts 16, and Acts 18. The centrality of the Shema, the oneness of Israel's Elohim, much more about this later in the study, informed Paul's theology when he wrote that in Christ-following assemblies there was no place for segregation or discrimination. So contrary to public law, because the people in Corinth were obviously living in what we now call Greece, they didn't have the ability to function in life under Jewish law until they actually became proselytes to Judaism. And the book will go into that in more detail as we read on. You have any thoughts so far?
No, I would agree. We've had to uncover a lot of these things in the years that we've been trying to bring because as I grew up in the church, there was a separation from what Paul was saying in his writings from what the Tanakh, the Old Testament, is saying. And so I was challenged personally to try to, because I knew that God being the same yesterday, today, and forever, and doesn't change, that there can't be any hypocrisy, there can't be any division in the words, there can't be one place saying one thing and totally different the other. So I had to try to find a way to make it all unify and be on the same mindset. And that took time to try to break down what Paul was saying, much like what this book is doing.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of a Hebraic mindset versus a Greek mindset was a new concept to me as I began to walk in this.
Yes, and it is huge.
And it isn't something that you bridge in a week or by going to a seminar or a conference.
Right.
It really is. It has to be the Word coming alive in your heart. And so it's just fascinating to me that there are people who understand that Shaul was Jewish throughout, just like he writes in his letters. You know, that was one of the big puzzling things to me is why do we think he's a Christian when we get to Acts 21, 22, 24, and he's saying, I'm a Pharisee, and I know that chronologically this is taking place around 60 AD, some 30 years after Yeshua goes to the execution stake. It's not like it's a mystery, it's not secret, but we all were taught to read the Bible the way our teachers read the Bible.
Yes. One of the big ones for me was in Acts chapter 18, Paul has taken a Nazirite vow.
Yeah.
And this is after the death and resurrection of our Messiah. So you're like, okay, well, if the law is no longer applicable, why is he taking a Nazirite vow? So another thing to unravel. And so when he gets to Jerusalem, to the other elders, and they say, hey, there was things being said, you're teaching against the law of Moses, but to show everybody that's not true, because we know it's not true, take these 4 men who are under the same Nazirite vow as yourself and go to the temple and do what's required and pay their expenses. Well, you've got to go back to Numbers chapter 12 or 15, whatever the chapter is, 12 or 15, to find out each person has to present 3 animals.
Yes.
So that means Paul paid for 15 animals, for all 5 of them, a gallon of oil each, a gallon of wine each, And they're going down there to the temple, because it hasn't been destroyed yet, and they're going to shave their head, put their offerings down, and they're going to burn it on the altar right there with the priest
Yes.
after the resurrection of Messiah. And so, yes, obviously clear point that Paul is still a Jew, still keeping the things that his families and his heritage and the patriarchs all did after the death and resurrection of Mashiach.
Amen. Amen. All right. Let's see. Where are we? You want to pick
I
it
think
up?
you ended right here.
Okay. You want to pick up there?
So it informed Paul's theology when he wrote that in Christ following assemblies, there was no place for segregation or discrimination. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free man. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Messiah Yeshua. Very important point, because he's telling us right there that even though we shouldn't be separating on ethnic points, we shouldn't be separating on our perspectives, trying to make somebody look like us, think like us, like Yeshua told the apostles, hey, let's call fire down from heaven. Look what they're doing. He said, no. They're not scattering. We're not going to do that.
Yeah. Amen.
So additionally, in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul wrote that a woman's head must be covered while she is engaged in speaking in tongues or prophesying in a public assembly. The question was not, therefore, if a woman could speak and teach, but how it should be done in a way that would be right before God, angels, and the people of Corinth. When we read Paul's letters, we need to keep in mind that 1 Corinthians was not the beginning of this correspondence. I wanted to mention here on this covering of the head, I've had lots of ladies come to me and with questions about being able to marry after a divorce. And I had to do a lot of research into that and dissecting the Greek words. And I came to the understanding and realization that the Greek word being used does not mean that she cannot marry after divorce. I found out, like this writer is finding out a lot about the history, is that it was very commonplace for the Jews of the first century they would send their wife away without the divorce certificate, without the get.
Yeah.
And if she was sent away without the divorce certificate, obviously no man's going to accept her, because he's going to walk up to her. The first thing he's going to say, are you a virgin? She says, no. He's going to say, well, show me your divorce certificate. If she doesn't have one, he walks away and goes, I can't touch you because it would be adultery, right?
Right.
So it was terrible what men were doing to women. And so what the issue is the women have to have the separation from the covenant. That covenant has to be dissolved between her and the first husband so that she can enter another covenant agreement with another. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Not about...
That's the way we teach it as well.
Yes.
Because he clarifies that in Matthew that there has to be a legitimate reason for a divorce.
Yes.
And the legitimate reason is adultery.
For sure would be adultery, yes.
Yeah. And so.
And I would add to that, physical abuse.
Absolutely.
We really can't tolerate physical abuse, but yeah. So that was, and because if you can't marry after divorce, then how is God going to take the northern kingdom back again? Because he clearly divorced them.
Yeah. Amen. We are on the same page.
All right, so when I finished that. So Paul wrote at least one letter to the Corinthians prior to this, 1 Corinthians 5:9, and the Corinthian leadership had also written to him, 1 Corinthians 7:1. It is therefore highly probable that the statement in 1 Corinthians 14 is a quotation from a letter that the Corinthian male leadership had addressed to Paul. It was their proposal on how to bring order into the disruptive practice of some women in the congregation as they spoke in tongues and prophesied. Paul, however, disagreed.
If this text is viewed as a quotation, then the challenge in 1 Corinthians 14:36 that Paul brings to the male leadership makes perfect sense. Was it from you, and here the article is masculine, that the word of Elohim first went forth? Or has it come to you only? And that was kind of a rhetorical question, obviously. In my reading, according to Shaul, the all-male leadership of the Corinthian congregation was not to forbid women to speak in tongues, and themselves were to be encouraged to prophesy, just as the women among them already were doing. Therefore, my brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy, and do not forbid to speak in tongues, but all things must be done properly and in an orderly manner. And of course, many of us grew up in Christian traditions where speaking in tongues doesn't really fit the biblical mandate of Acts chapter 2. So, he's not saying you get up and you start praying in the Spirit, inaudible, not understandable to anyone in the room, that it must be done in a way that brings honor, not confusion. And so they were speaking about supernaturally being able to speak in the tongues of the cultures around them that they wouldn't normally speak their language.
Amen.
So,
I think you were here.
Paul's solution, therefore, was not to exclude half of the congregation, or I'm going to guess maybe even more than half of the congregation, from exercising the gifts of the Spirit, but rather to make sure that it was done in a respectful, proper, and orderly fashion. So I think that Shaul was right about women? Absolutely. I think he was. His Corinthian opponents were not. So I think we can probably make the statement that we are in agreement with that statement.
100%. And I like these things because it's bringing the correct balance from the Tanakh and the first century writings, where there's no, when we look at it right, there is no division. They're not separated. They have the same mindset. It's just we have to understand it from the writers that wrote it.
Amen. All right. So my journey. So this is Dr. Eli's, just bringing us up to speed on how he came to study the Apostle Paul. And again, Dr. Eli was associated with Hebrew University Online when I took classes from Hebrew University, and he has since established a study center called the Israel Bible Center, I think, where they continue to offer classes for Christians who want to know more about the Jewish faith. So I came to the study of the Apostle Paul unexpectedly. I say unexpectedly because while avoiding it for many years, I finally could not put it off any longer, as I was commissioned by the Israel Institute of Biblical Studies to author an online course on the Jewish background of the New Testament. That's the Israel Institute of Biblical Studies is the online division of Hebrew University, or it was at one time when I was there. In dealing with the New Testament, one simply cannot avoid such a towering figure as the Apostle Paul. Although I first approached the topic with fear and trepidation due to the well-known and widely believed intense complexity of his thought, I was totally dumbfounded when I was finally able to understand how simple his ideas really were. I don't know that I've gotten to that point yet, but it's much clearer than it used to be.
Yes.
So, in fact, it could even be argued that the Apostle Shaul had only one major idea which influenced and produced all his secondary ones. This realization comes at the moment one begins to understand Shaul as a first-century apocalyptic Jewish thinker, meaning that he is fully believing as a Pharisee, because the difference that set the Pharisees apart from the other sects within Judaism was their belief in the resurrection, and that it would be triggered by the Messiah coming. They didn't have all those details really down pat in their doctrine yet, and they were a work in progress, even as we're a work in progress. But nonetheless, the apocalyptic piece of what he's saying here is that an expectation that the throne of David was going to be reestablished in the earth. that makes sense to everybody. And I want to remind you, because some of you have joined, that if you have a question, we would like to entertain those, or if you have a thought. So if you can unmute yourself and
Yep.
just get our attention.
You're welcome to join in the conversation.
We would very much like that, because this is intended to be kind of Drosh style rather than a lecture style.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question then.
All right.
Just to clarify, what is the meaning of a woman's head being covered?
So in my studies on that, the covering of the hair was a lot of times whether just like with a man, because it talks about a man shall not have his head covered or uncovered. I can't remember which way it goes when he's praying.
Uncovered.
But it had to do with the hair being for a man, whether it was put back or whether it was forward covering his face. It was not dealing with an article of clothing or a garment on top of the head. That's my studies on it, is that there was the man created in the image of God. If his face was covered up like this, the way I understood it from the text, with his hair pulled back, he's now the glory of God can be seen while he's praying. And so that's what I understood. So down was covered, back was uncovered. And I know that the women's hair, forward and back, meant a lot of whether they were available or whether they were taken. So those were other things to consider in the statements of what the writer writes.
Yeah, the status of marriage was a key point.
Yeah.
In knowing whether she was under authority.
Yeah.
And so, amen. All right.
Did that answer your question okay?
Yes, so it's actually the hair itself in the position that it's in rather than being under a husband's authority or a veil or a garment.
Yes, and I'll let you know that here at our congregation and me myself, we believe that the women are a very strong, vital part in Hebrew culture, Hebrew thought, Hebrew living, and I don't personally. I know that it's taught that way, but I don't believe that any of the writers of the scriptures believe that there was a hierarchy in male and female relationships. I personally believe that Jeremiah 31:22, when it says, I'm going to create a renewed thing on the earth, a woman is going to encompass a man. When you dissect that scripture, it literally means that a woman is going to be a hedge of protection around a man again, just as Eve was created to be a protector of her husband, Adam. If you're an enemy and you want to breach the walls of Jerusalem, or you want to get to the people inside, you've got to breach the wall, which is the protection. It's the circle. And so the Eve's name, Chava, starts with the chet, which is a hedge of protection. It's that hedge. And so I personally believe that women have been gifted with the ability to bring counsel to the men, which a lot of men are faulty and not listening to counsel. And you can even see it in other aspects, like the Roman culture, when Pilate's wife told him, I perceive this man as holy, you should not lay a hand on him. And he's listening to counsel. And so each person plays a role. I don't want to get too far into that, but women are much to the point where Christianity has painted it to be this, and I got to tell you, I had to come a long way, because I was taught, with my church pastor background, that the man rules the woman and she's to be, she's to submit and you to, and boy, what a long way I've come. And my wife's Italian. And so we fought for the first 25 years of our marriage until we came to the understanding of the truth. So much, much better
Yeah.
with the realization of the way it should be.
Any that is connected to the idea of the Chayil woman in Proverbs 30, and
Yes.
being valiant, being a great spiritual warrior. And so that's why many of the great intercessors are actually females.
And look at Deborah. I mean, she judged Israel. And so there's just so many evidences. And so yeah, it's when we unpack the truth and we dissect it, we come to the real understanding of what it's intended to be. And I'm so glad that the Spirit of the Almighty is moving amongst us all to unravel all these things that were just not presented correctly.
Yes, amen. All right. Anything
I
else on that,
I'd
Kitty?
like to
Go ahead, Marvin.
I'd like to add to that. I've worked security teams for houses of worship for a while, and I always pushed for ladies to be on those teams because they see a different side of things than males do, and that they're able to warn people when we overlook that stuff. I have found in one place where no, we can't do that because women aren't supposed to be. But I can, just from what I've seen doing the security, that's certainly a valid point. What you brought.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Anybody else have something they want to bring up? We'll move on. So,
Well, just one other quick question. What should this look like today for
Well,
women?
are you asking like, should women be rabbis? Should women be?
No. What should, I mean, if the position of a woman's hair is the foundation, and a woman should cover her hair when she speaks or she prophesies or she speaks in tongue, what should that look like today?
Well, let me say this. I think we need to be really careful how Shaul responds to individual congregations thinking that he taught the same thing everywhere, because he tells us he doesn't. That there are
Okay.
certain times and situations where local culture has influenced the way that people come into the kingdom. They come from various pagan religions. They have various practices that they grew up with, that they know, and it's sometimes hard to lay those down, as we're kind of talking about. And so, really, the basis for us at Forerunners is that Torah is the foundation. The apostolic writings are like a commentary. We can draw from that how to apply Torah to our lives. But if I can't find something in Torah, then I'm not going to be dogmatic about that being doctrinal. Does that make sense, Kitty? So Mark
Yes,
might feel
thank you so
differently.
much. That helps.
Yeah.
Mark might feel differently, but
No,
I just don't think we can override Torah
no.
at all.
Yeah.
So that leads to bigger problems.
One of the interesting things about your question is, and this comes from my wife, and again, I'll state again, she's Italian, and she is never lacking opinion. Just I'll say that. So,
So she's really
and
Jewish.
she's thoroughly, yes. So, and I've learned to value that, where, as I said in the beginning of our relationship, I didn't. But anyway, so she says, are we to think that women are commanded and entrusted to teach the children all the way up to whatever age you want to say, but they can teach the children, but can't teach anyone else? And she makes a very good point.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
All right. Hopefully everybody is good. So are we at this?
I have a question.
realization?
This
Yeah.
is Lewis.
Nice. Hey, Lewis.
So just for clarification, I'm sure. Uh, so you said that different congregations in the apostolic writings that Shaul may have taught things, certain things that are not specifically addressed in the Torah, that he would have taught different things to different congregations as far as these matters.
Well, I
Did I
don't
understand
mean
that
to
right?
say that he's teaching different things in different places. What I meant to say is that situations that he's addressing, that question hasn't come up in another place. So it doesn't get relayed to us, that, but what he's addressing are the problem kids, the problem children.
Yeah, there could be. So one in Ephesus, they may have had a totally different problem than they had in Corinth. So, and he's dealing with the issues in the congregation as they arise. So, I think that's what Pastor Randall was.
Yeah, it's him exercising his apostolic overview of trying to bring everybody to the same page. But just as when you have multiple children in a family, you know that you don't always get the same responses from each kid. Some of them you have to handle a little bit differently.
And he will be using Torah and his knowledge and teaching and understanding of it to bring about understanding, clarity, reproof, and teaching to those congregations. So, yeah.
Does that help, Louis?
You were muted, so we'll
Okay.
take it that you said yes.
Okay. All right. Are we at this realization?
Yeah.
This realization comes at the moment one begins to understand Shaul as a first century apocalyptic Jewish thinker, as one who was not unlike other thinkers, both in his own period of time in history and those still ages away from it, which would maybe be us. Even though this may sound very strange, given the uniqueness of Paul's encounter with Yeshua, once we begin to compare his interpretive trajectories with other Jewish interpreters, the connection between them will become abundantly clear. When I was reading through this with my wife, she went, "What?" And so, the term interpretive trajectories, meaning that as you interpret and you build a foundation and you build on that foundation, it provides a trajectory of where you're going. It's kind of along the line of you have to know who you are, you have to have identity to be able to get to your destiny. You have to be able to know where you're going. So all of our doctrine, all of our studies should be in the mode of getting us another step down the road of where we're going. Hopefully that makes sense.
Hopefully this will, I don't know how many of you have heard this, but in in Hebrew mindset, it's their idea of looking at the past and the future is like a person rowing a boat. The place I'm going is behind me, but my eyes are focused on where I've come from. The beginning, the things that we've been taught, all the foundational things is where my focus is. I'm rowing that direction, but my mindset is on all the things that has the foundational things have been built.
That's good. I may steal that. All right. So don't get me wrong. I had read his letters before, most of them many times, but like you, I found large portions confusing and at times contradictory. What is more, like most Jews who followed Jesus, at important points, I found some of what the Apostle Paul allegedly had to say disturbing and wildly counterintuitive to my Jewish mind. This wrongly perceived sharp difference between the Apostle Shaul and Judaism has been explained by many people in many different ways. Eventually, all claimed, including the New Perspective on Paul crowd, and that's been in recent years, Christian theologians and scholars are beginning to warm up to the idea, in some circles, not all, that maybe we've misrepresented Paul by claiming that he started Christianity in much the same way that maybe Kepha or Peter wasn't the first pope. Kind of that same mindset. Um, eventually, eventually, all claimed, including the New Perspective on Paul crowd, that Shaul ended up practicing a form of religion that was distinct in some significant way from Judaism. In this brief work, I argue that absolutely everything that the Apostle Shaul wrote to the Gentile Christ followers in his letters, whether traditional or innovative, came not from the outside, but from the very heart of first century Judaism. Obviously, I'm in agreement with that statement, and
Yeah, and I would just say, whenever we talk in modern times in today's language of Judaism, I always like to remind people that Jew and Judah is one of the 12 tribes. There are other tribes that are still yet to come into the fold, as Messiah said, "I have other sheep of other fold that I must bring into this one." And Judaism in the first century had, because of the oral tradition or the Talmud and the Mishnah, it wasn't written, it was just an oral. So we have to remember, whenever Paul is writing his letters and he's speaking negatively about a law, he's never speaking negatively about the law of God. He's speaking negatively mostly about, and it's declared this in the writings, the law of sin and death, because the law of sin and death was negative against us. It was hostile towards us, as the writer says. And so that's the negative aspect. And what he's always speaking that never about God's law, always about the law of sin and death, and sometimes the things that man has brought into the picture through these oral interpretations that have gotten sideways, like the washing of the hands that Yeshua corrected them on. So some of these things just needed to be corrected because they had grown into man's traditions.
My good one.
And- yes.
did someone have a question or a thought? Okay.
I think you were somewhere down here.
Yeah. Of course, you will probably say the issue is a lot more complicated than this. I would answer yes, great minds think alike. I readily agree. I humbly ask for several hours of your undivided attention to allow me to present to you my thoughts. In the end, no one but you, my dear reader, will be able to decide if what I propose makes sense. Consider it, scrutinize it, sleep on it. All of these things are in order. In explaining how I envisioned this writing project, I would be remiss if I did not mention that this experience was very similar to my studies in Yohanan's Gospel. If you have not read my book, The Jewish Gospel of John, you should consider doing so soon. That is another book. Actually, I read that book long before this book was even out. And it does have some great points on the Gospel of John. Again, I'm not going to say I agree with all of his points on the Gospel of John, but it was very helpful as I kind of weeded through the process of not really having a mentor to walk me through this. You know, in the process of trying to work with other people, partner with other people, I was just sort of kind of like the Apostle Shaul. He doesn't have the benefit of spending those 3.5 years with Yeshua like the other apostles did. He got a special course in the desert in Syria, which may have been even better, who knows? But nonetheless, you know, we all need somebody who can help us process. And I just relied on the Holy Spirit oftentimes because there wasn't really anybody else in my realm. And I looked, I searched, and I just couldn't find anyone that I could relate to. Or if I could relate to them, they didn't have time for me or something. And so I kind of pioneered this course, probably a lot like Mark has,
Mhm.
by just relying on the Holy Spirit to bring you a thought. It might be at 10 o'clock at night. It might be at 3 o'clock in the morning. It might be during a normal study time, say 9:30 in the morning. But oftentimes, you just have to have that thought, and then you have to ponder it,
Amen.
chew on it. So he struggled with this problematic Apostle Shaul in my mind and heart, hoping down deep that I would never have to face the most difficult questions commonly associated with one of the greatest Jews who has ever walked the dusty roads of the Middle East. Amen. And I don't really know. We're at 11:08. So, all right. You want to read the disclaimer?
Okay. This brief statement is not meant to be exhaustive. In fact, it is purposely limited. It is meant to arouse in you a greater desire to study this fascinating first century Jewish man from a different viewpoint than that to which you are likely accustomed. Whether I have succeeded or not, it is, of course, yours to judge. But with this book, I continue to invite you to come and travel with me through this fascinating journey of discovery. Now, while I am here in this section called Disclaimer, please allow me the personal privilege to explain a few more things from the start. People routinely say to me in response to my lectures and publications, Dr. Eli, I so love to study the scriptures from the Jewish perspective, which is why I adore your studies and look forward to more. I often gently correct them by saying, did you know that there is no such thing as the Jewish perspective? You may reply, what is wrong with this statement? Well, you see, this statement wrongly assumes that Jews think in the same way about any given topic. There are many great jokes that we have to highlight this problem. What I present in my materials is really my personal Jewish perspective, and this is how I see things. If you find my perspective convincing, I invite to adopt it as yours. But if you must be aware that another Jew may see things in another way, perhaps dramatically different from me. Those of you who know me personally or have followed my research for a long time know that I far prefer clarity to agreement. Hear, hear. There is nothing wrong with you disagreeing with me on some or all of my points. For me, as for most Jews, the most important thing is not that we will come to an agreement and walk into the sunset together, but that we would argue and debate each other with deep passion, with a high level of engagement and analysis, but with abiding respect for one another.
Man, that is something that is easier said than done.
In the Hebrew mindset, it's not hard, but for all of us, especially in the Hebrew roots Messianic movement, it's very, very tough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Because we're bombarded from all
Yeah.
sides with, you're doing it wrong. You're
Yep.
doing it wrong. When we first started, the thing was, oh, you're doing the Jewish thing. Oh, you're doing the Jewish thing.
Yeah.
And I would repeat over and over and over again, no, we're not Jewish. We are simply trying to live the Bible.
Yeah.
And not just part of the Bible, but the whole Bible. And
Yeah.
so, and Shaul very clearly teaches us in Ephesians chapter 2, as all of you online have heard me teach this dozens of times. He's very clear in saying that you are no longer Gentile. You can't take that statement lightly.
No.
Though many do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so anyway,
One more thing. Sooner or later, you will see the influence of Mark Nanos works on my own. Mark is a wonderful human being and a great scholar of Apostle Paul within Judaism. I make references to him where I believe I gleaned the point from his lectures or books, but it is possible, as with other scholars, that we have impacted my thinking that at times I can no longer recall whether it was my point or theirs.
yeah, I can relate to that. But Mark Nanos is actually on faculty at the University of Kansas, where most of you know I attended college. He wasn't on the faculty then, but they have developed a Jewish studies course at KU, and so he's a very well-known guy. So I thought, well, I've got to talk to this guy. He's a Jayhawk, and unfortunately, it never dawned on me that he could be the foremost scholar on the Apostle Shaul while not a believer in Yeshua.
Mhm.
That was just a foreign concept that I just couldn't get my head around that at first. So I contacted him first by email, and then we exchanged phone numbers, and I called him, and and I mistakenly asked him about his walk, because I just assumed that he was a messianic believer, and I greatly offended him by making that assumption.
Yeah.
And I, of course, stumbled over myself, from that point on, apologizing. But it was kind of set in stone at that moment that, he didn't really want to be in relationship with me. And so, but his books are a little more academic than like the book we're reading. I mean, this is a little more easy flow thing as opposed to a more academic structure. But Mark Nanos has written some wonderful books on the various letters that Shaul wrote, and I gleaned a lot from that. That was very instrumental in helping me make the shift. And I'm grateful for his gift to Messianic Judaism and those of us who were practicing Apostolic Judaism, as opposed to the the he contributed greatly to me and to my understanding, and I'm appreciative. All right, what's what's the next?
Uh, well, I don't know what part
Oh,
you want
my
to cover.
Okay. Um, let's go to chapter 1, I guess.
Okay. Chapter 1, was Paul converted to Christianity?
Go ahead.
A luxury Paul did not have. A young man once came to a rabbi and said, "Hey, rabbi, I don't really know what to do here. There is this one woman. We love each other, but she and I are very poor, so what good would it do if we get married and have kids? We won't be able to help anyone, and our whole life will be aimed at survival."
Can I interrupt for just a sec? This is a very kind of hidden reference if you don't understand it, but
I'm gonna bring this
tzedakah,
down just a little bit.
the idea of tzedakah, the acts of righteousness, the acts of being your brother's keeper, is very much a part of a Jewish heart, a Jewish heart who is pursuing God, whatever way that may look to us. Hospitality and being charitable, but it all relates back to righteousness in the sense of keeping the commandments. They're
Amen.
all interconnected. You can't pull them apart.
That's right.
And so this is a representation of a man who is tzedakah. He is wanting to be righteous before the Lord, but he understands, marrying the wrong woman might cause some problems.
So he says, on the other hand, there's this other woman. I don't love her, but she really loves me and she's rich. Maybe I should marry her. Rabbi, what do you think? The rabbi says, well, that's it. It's decided. Marry the rich woman and it will be well. The man, after thinking for a month, said, Rabbi, you know, I've been thinking about your advice and I'm not sure about it after all. You see, if I marry this well to do woman, will we be able to do any good things in the community? But I will be miserable all my life. And in the long run, she too will be very unhappy. Perhaps I should, after all, think about marrying the poor woman I love. What do you think? The rabbi says, have you considered converting to Christianity? I have a wonderful priest down the road to refer you to. In this puzzlement, the young man asked if this would somehow resolve his problem. The rabbi answered, no, but it will certainly resolve mine. So in this anecdote, the rabbi had the luxury of thinking that his own professional troubles, such as counseling indecisive young Jews about personal matters, could be resolved by advising conversion to another religion. Paul and others in the first century Roman Empire had no such luxury. After all, there was no Christianity to convert to at
Am-
that time. Yeah.
Amen. So basically, our understanding of forerunners, and I suspect that yours is pretty similar, is that there was really no organization as these little groups of faith popped up from Persia to Egypt to Rome to various places in the Roman Empire. And if there wasn't one of the original apostles that gave wisdom and gave insight on developing their faith, they wandered off into all kinds of stuff. And so it was in the 3rd and 4th centuries when Constantine wanted to use religion to bring unity to the kingdom, and he developed. I think he became emperor about 306 or something A.D. And by the time he had been in the Caesarship for 20 years, there was chaos in the kingdom. There was rebellion. So he came up with this scheme to use a common religion for the whole empire to eliminate the differences between the peoples. He was a sun worshiper, which is why we have Sunday, but that's another whole nother story. So, but he gathered the bishops of these individual groups in Syria and Persia and Iraq and what we call Iraq now, and all over the kingdom, and invited them on an all expenses paid trip to come to Nicaea, which is today Izrek, Turkey. And in Turkey, in Nicaea, they were given the commission to iron out their differences and to deal with the people that were hard to get along with and to develop a uniform. I call it the institutionalization of Christianity, for lack of a better term. Maybe you have a better one. But that happened, around 325 AD. And he was anti-Jewish. He hated Jews. And so in order to keep the emperor happy, they had to completely let go of any connection to the biblical calendar as we know it, and to keeping the Sabbath, to anything that was the relics of the Jewish faith that were still a part of the faith had to be eliminated for them to have favor with the Caesar, which has always been problematic in man's attempt to serve Elohim.
Amen.
So that's some kind of the background here that we're dealing with is, and who knew that? I didn't know that.
Right.
It's only been with the advent of the internet and lots of old documents now being uploaded that we even have been able to kind of get a glimpse of how things happened, how things came about. And you can't teach something that you haven't learned. And so we just have been regurgitating that Christian thought for 1700 years now of we really don't have anything to do with the Jews. And it's heartbreaking, but that's the reality of where we've come from. You want to have anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree with what you're saying. This next part really starts breaking into some really interesting things that I think all of us, we come to the knowledge of the scriptures are valid for us. And then the next part is we come to realization of our identity. And it's addressed here right off the bat. So if you want to read it, I can read it.
Go ahead.
So it says here, he's still a Pharisee. In other words, he's still walking in the ways that he walked all of his life. Discovering the Jewish apostle Paul usually begins with rethinking what most normative Christ followers of today routinely call Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. The Apostle Paul himself wrote about this experience in Galatians 1:15 through 16. Elohim, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his son to me so that I might preach him among the nations. Now, I've always thought, up until 10 years ago, that the nations were just all these other people that were non-Jewish. And after dissecting this word nations and looking back at the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the commission that Yeshua gave to the apostles in both instances, he told them specifically to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so you have to dissect that phrase. Who are the lost sheep of the house of Israel? When I first looked at that, I thought, well, that means, the Jewish people. But that's not what it means. The phrase house of Israel is completely separate and distinctively different from the house of Judah. And you can see the two in Ezekiel many times are in the same sentence, the same verse, house of Judah, house of Israel. And the house of Israel are the nations. They are the ones who have been scattered all over the earth. So when Yeshua told them to go to the house of Israel, Paul is saying here that I'm going to the same place. I'm going to the nations, the people where my people are. And what's interesting is remember, the northern kingdom is made up a lot from Ephraim and Manasseh, the children from Joseph, who is the child of Rachel. And so this is interesting because Benjamin is also the other child from Rachel. And God chooses, and I would challenge you to look and find out the apostles that Yeshua picked were all from the northern kingdom. They were all from around Galilee. Why did he pick Galileans to go hunt for the lost sheep? And why did he pick a Benjamite who is a son of Rachel? Remember, Rachel is weeping for her children. Who are her children? She's only got 2 kids.
Yeah.
So Benjamin is going to go hunt for Ephraim and all the rest of the northern kingdom people. And I believe that's why he went. So I don't know if we're going to get there today, but I brought a study here for you and some scriptures for you to look at of the promise that God made to Abraham. So let's see if we end up getting there. This might be it. However, we read in Acts 23:6 that even after this call of God, Paul defended himself to the Sanhedrin in the following way: Brethren, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. I am on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead, which is exactly where all Pharisees stood. They believed, as you mentioned earlier, in the resurrection, whereas the Sadducees did not. It is natural for people to draw a line of separation between the Pharisees and early Christ followers, but for Paul, this line was unthinkable.
We need this. Just
Yeah.
really highlight that. I wish I could highlight it on your
Hello,
screens.
knock, knock.
Not thinkable.
Don't even think about it. He would be blown away if he knew what people were thinking today. So in his mind, his Pharisaic hopes came to a much desired, though certainly in some ways unexpected fulfillment in Messiah Yeshua, contrary to the traditional reading of his trial before the Sanhedrin. He did not act disingenuously. He appealed in good conscience to the members of the Sanhedrin that were likely to understand his claim. Paul's claim was based upon a foundational idea of contemporary Pharisaic thought, the resurrection of the body. The reaction of some of the Pharisees who came to Paul's rescue shows that his thinking was justified.
Amen.
So it says in Acts 23, we find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? Acts 23. And so Paul was not simply using his past status of being a Pharisee to get out of a difficult situation unharmed. Instead, he called his brothers in faith, other Pharisees that were present, to recognize that he was one of them.
And I think it's also good to point out here that in Romans, Shaul very clearly still calls his Jewish brothers who are not believers in Yeshua brothers. There was no disassociation with the Jewish brethren, even though they weren't on the same page. They hadn't come to the realization yet that Messiah had come. And that gets lost in contemporary thought because the Pharisees are thought of as being the enemies of the believers in Messiah, whereas you just pointed out they weren't.
Right.
And in Romans, it's very clear that he still sees the Jews as being brothers because he believes that they will all come to faith,
Yes.
that they will come to, and that the promise is for them, even though they don't get it today, it is theirs to claim as well. Amen. All right. So Paul was not a Christian, and that's highlight, another highlight.
Another highlight.
The idea that Paul converted to Christianity is not new at all. In fact, it is deeply rooted in history, beginning in around the 3rd century when Gentile Christ followers sought at first to decisively separate from any Jewish authority structures and ended up almost completely separating from everything construed to be Jewish. So that's what I was talking about with what ended up being the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. That was kind of the crowning moment. It had been going on for a while. In fact, the Apostle Yohanan said, we've got people among us who are not teaching the truth, who are not, not genuine in their faith. It didn't take 200 years for the Hasatan to stir up, unbelief. It's always been. It's just always been. And so there wasn't a shift. It was just a recognition that there are people who are going to take the gospel, the good news, and really by adding to it and subtracting from it, they're going to demolish the true meaning of it. That makes sense at all. So one example of such decisions is that of the calendar. Non-Jewish followers of Jesus believe that the holiday described in the Torah, such as Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot, Pentecost, were to be perpetually observed, but they interpreted them differently from the Jews and did not want to wait for the Jewish authorities to sync the Israelite holiday schedule to the Roman imperial one. And of course, this is a big thing for me, as all of you who are part of Forerunners understand, that when I started down this path, the Lord said to me, learn my calendar, get on my calendar, teach my calendar, not meaning the Jewish calendar, but the calendar he had given to Moshe. And so this is very dear to my heart in understanding that the onslaught of ideas that were not the way Moshe taught them just keep coming in waves and waves and waves, and still keep coming in waves. So it was at this point in the non-Jewish Christ-following movement, it could be argued that it became the religion we now call Christianity. So yes, there is a reference one time in Acts about the believers in Antioch being Christians, but that was derogatory. That was them being made fun of. It wasn't establishing that there was a religion called Christianity. That didn't come, like I said, until 325, when it became institutionalized, when it became expected that you were going to line up with Rome, which is still a pretty prominent place among so-called Christ followers today. So it was at this point in the non-Jewish Christ-following movement that it became the religion we now call Christianity. It reworked the original Israelite feasts in opposition to Jewish traditional practices. Moreover, Gentile Christian leaders set the dates of the biblical feast to be purposely unconnected with the existing Israelite calendars in any way. And you have to just come to a conclusion. Am I going to follow the Roman calendar or am I going to follow Abba's calendar? Roman calendar, Abba's calendar. Unfortunately, when I started even in ministry, I didn't really understand that Abba had his own calendar and that we weren't supposed to build our lives around the Roman calendar. Of course, you have to make your dentist appointments and those kinds of things using a calendar that world lives with. But in terms of your faith and practicing your faith, it has to be by Abba's calendar if it's going to be genuine.
Amen.
So,
I think you're
yeah, short side trip into church history. Gene, I'm sorry you're not here to, keep me in line. A short side trip into church history will make this more concrete in our minds. In many predominantly Christian countries, the festival of Easter, which was supposedly the Christian Passover, has no audible connection with the Hebrew word Pesach. Why? Simply because the logic of Christian theology went as follows. In the resurrection of Jesus, the judgment of God passed over the sinners' heads, just as it passed over the heads of the Israelites in their exodus from ancient Egypt. You see, all 2nd and 3rd century Christ followers celebrated a festival that much later would be known as Easter. It has been called Pascha. I'm not sure. I know it's Italian. It's that. Do you know your wife's take on that?
Yeah, it's
Pascha. Yeah, Pascha.
Pashka.
Pascha. Okay. It's been called Pascha, Passover in Syriac, Aramaic, or Pesach in Hebrew. Over time, Christian and Jewish leaders worked hard to create a clear separation between these two faith communities. It's not hard. When you don't want to get along with someone, it's real easy to find reasons to separate, and we see the results of that. The question for the emergent non-Israelite Christ-following movement was not whether biblical feasts such as Passover should be observed, but rather how and when. And of course, that has changed over time even as well, because Christmas, you don't find Christmas in the apostolic writings. And obviously, we all know, all of you online today know that, but it just further highlights the wanting to do it their own way. Moshe said, you're going to, get off the course and you're going to do things your own way. And unfortunately, he was a prophet, and that, and it came true. So there were many who held that this Pascha, Pesach, had to be commemorated on the same date as the Jewish and biblical Israelite Passover on the 14th of Nisan. Here is another example of the influence in Messianic Judaism of the Babylonian text. Moses didn't call the first month of the year Nisan. That came from Babylonia. He called it Aviv. But in Messianic Judaism, it's just, it's just kind of one or the other. It's okay. And actually, Nisan is more prevalent in Jewish places. And that is a big deal to me. It's one of my, things, because Abba said, learn my calendar, get on my calendar, teach my calendar, and Nisan is nowhere to be found until we get to the prophets, where because all of Israel followed the biblical calendar according to scholars. They all followed the calendar just as Moses put it forth until the first temple was destroyed, and the Judahites went into Babylon. And they got influenced by Babylon. And as you know, Babylon's first month of the year on their calendar, on Babylon's calendar, is the 7th month. And that's how we ended up with Rosh Hashanah, 7th month, Happy New Year. when that's not the way that the Lord intended for us to celebrate it. So I better move on, or we'll be spending 2 hours right here. But it's a very important thing because this was where my journey began. So the majority of Christ following Gentile leaders, however, had a serious objection to this idea. The issue was submission to the local Jewish, non-Christ following religious authorities. The logic went like this: we have discovered the truth in Jesus, but they, without accepting God's Son, will decide when we have accepted him, and those who have accepted him should celebrate him. It must be said that this was an unfortunate situation that had no easy solution. Now, I would also beg to differ just a little bit here in how he's presenting this. The Matthew 21 is very clear in telling us that Yeshua says, I'm taking the authority away from you, Sanhedrin, and I'm giving authority to those who will bear fruit, meaning his disciples, his apostles. So it was the apostles who were the spiritual authority in the first century for believers in Yeshua, not the Sanhedrin. And so I would explain this a little bit differently than what Dr. Eli is explaining it here, but nonetheless, it's a valid thought. So the time when Jews, in this case Christ-following Jews in Acts 15, made decisions over what the nation should do and not do was effectively over. Again, this isn't the non-Messiah believing authority. The authority in Acts 15 was the apostles. And Shaul submitted to the apostles in Jerusalem because that was how spiritual authority works. And so he remained under their covering, if you will, and he went with the idea of helping to establish doctrine as they went forth, but he wouldn't have overruled them, in my opinion. He would have
Right. No.
he would have honored their decision.
Yeah.
So by the 3rd century of the Common Era, a new generation of leaders were born and raised, leading the Jesus movement in another direction. They were not born Jews as Kepha and Shaul, nor were they discipled by those guided by the Jerusalem Council's decisions that demanded a good relationship with the Jewish community. In fact, the opposite was the case. And I should also mention, while we're talking about the Jerusalem Council, we differ from Messianic Judaism on the interpretation of that entire passage. Yes, I believe that they established basic things that were going to be required of new people coming into the fellowship. But when you go on to read verse 21, they're going to be sitting and listening to the teaching of Moshe, Torah, and they will get it. It's not any different than when I was a Christian pastor and you led somebody to the Lord, you led them in the prayer, they repented, they were going to have a new life. You didn't expect them to understand the Bible. You directed them to start studying. This is the starting point. It's not the end point. We're just starting the journey. We're not at the end of the journey. And so it's lost upon Messianic Jews who hold to the idea that the Gentiles are not held to Torah.
Mhm.
And I know that we're in agreement on that. So
Yeah, and for me, and please, you guys can chime in if you'd like. We really enjoy your comments and thoughts. But for me, this is another one of those things that were uncovered. Is that again, the New Testament, the Tanakh, they are in alignment with each other, and it's just when you look at what Paul and the writer's objective is. And as you mentioned, these 4 things they told him to do, isn't that what they did with Ruth when she came in? Isn't that what they did when Caleb, he joined? How about all of the probably 1 million people from Egypt and the surrounding nations that joined them in the Exodus, all those new people coming into the faith, they were just learning a little at a time. But they said these four things which were attached to idolatry,
Yeah.
idolatry, they wanted that idolatrous practice eliminated because you cannot have another God involved here. It's devotion to this one God, the Shema. And so, you know, Messianic Judaism says, oh, well, if you want to be part of this, you keep the Noahide laws. Well, where is that in the Bible? It's nowhere. That's a man-made concept. It doesn't exist. It's clear in God's word that there is one law, one Torah for everybody. And God never, how confusing would it be to have two different sets of instructions? You know, my
Amen.
children, I've got 8 kids. Okay, you 4, you're going to keep this set of rules, and you 4 keep this set. And I pray that the Lord will help me manage that somehow.
Yeah, and it even kind of evolves into the idea of you've got kids, your biological kids, and then here are these adopted
Yeah.
stepchild things.
No.
That doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
So anyway, all right. So most of these,
Pastor,
yes.
can you explain the Noahide laws? What
Um,
were those?
Well, Noahide laws is Messianic Judaism's attempt to say that if you can be a righteous person in be in right standing with Elohim by keeping these laws, they're not biblical. They're based on a biblical concept, but it's basically Judaism's way of avoiding what they tell me is reverse replacement theology. As many of you have heard me say, the former president of the UMJC was a friend of mine, and we're not in relationship anymore. Not that there was a oops, but there just was no reason to pursue a relationship with him because he said to me, Randall, you shouldn't be trying to follow Torah. You should just do the Christian thing. And I said, so you're telling me that when Yeshua said, if you love me, keep my commandments, that's not for me? He didn't answer that. He went into the sages say, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And and so the idea is that you can be outside the tribe, you can be outside the covenant, and still have a right relationship with Elohim. Go figure it out on your own is kind of how it plays out. And so that you can be Islamic, practicing Muslim, and be righteous before the God of Abraham. You can be Christian, you can be various other religions, as long as you agree that there are these basic things that you must do. And it is, it's grievous that doctrine was ever developed, but it was their way of dealing with kind of like the story we read, the joke we read a little while ago about the man who didn't know which woman he should marry. And the response was, oh, well, maybe you should convert to Christianity, because the idea is that you can still maintain a relationship with God, but you're not part of us anymore.
I'd like to give all of you, and I appreciate the question. It was you, Doris, that asked it, right? So if
Yeah,
you would, I
yes.
want to give you a piece, because this thing comes up when we're dealing with our brother Judah, whether it's Messianic Judaism or whether it's our brother Judah who does not agree with us on who the Messiah is. Revelation 19:8 is a very good scripture for all of us. That we need to realize what happened here. And it says, it was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen and bright and clean, for the fine linen of the bride is the righteous acts of the saints. And this word saints means holy ones. When you look at this Greek word for righteous, it's this word dikolmata, and it means ordinance, requirement, or righteousness. However, when the word appears in a plural form in Greek, which it is in this sentence, it says it specifically is used and means the divine precepts of the Mosaic law. What? Are you kidding me? You're telling me that the writer here in Revelation knew that the bride, the woman who is going to be clothed in this bright and clean linen, that linen is the Mosaic law being walked out and observed in her life. Says nothing about a Noahide law. It's Mosaic law. And so this is the theological word book of the Old Testament is the definition. So it's a very important scripture for us that really, especially for our Messianic Judaism, brother, because they would be reading the New Testament. Help me understand this, because the Greek word clearly says that we, the bride, we're to be keeping the Mosaic law. That's our fine linen.
And
So
And since the author is Yeshua himself,
that's right. Yeah.
I think he knows what he's talking about, because again, earlier in Revelation in chapter 12, verse 17, he says, his followers will be those who keep the Father's commandments and have the testimony of the Messiah.
That's right. Yeah.
Amen.
So it's a good thing about as we unpack these things, because we all are going to face them at some point with our brother Judah. And so we need to have understanding of, so that we can come back with, the right response that's true. And so,
Amen. And I really appreciate, because I have focused on the Hebrew, and you have really blessed me in the short time that we've been sort of in relationship with the going into the Greek and being able to connect it to Hebraic thought, even though it is Greek.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, we're gonna.
So the Noahide laws are the
Man-made.
Jewish laws?
man-made.
Yes, they're Jewish
Man-made. Okay.
religious people who, again, even the first century apostles didn't get the doctrine completely. They had to walk in it for a while before it started to make sense. When Kepha got a word that he, like in Acts, when the sheet is lowered and he's going, the Lord is saying eat, and he's going, I can't eat that. You understand where I'm talking about? That that then shortly thereafter, these guys knock on the door, and it's Gentiles inviting him to go to Caesarea. Scholars, historians think that was probably 38 or 39 AD, some 6 to 8, 9 years after Yeshua goes to the execution stake. They didn't really understand how to apply everything Yeshua taught them in the beginning. They had to walk in it, and it made more sense as they went. Kepha, in that case, still had the mindset of the Gentiles are unclean. Torah never calls the Gentiles unclean. That was their religion speaking, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts before we keep reading?
All right. Was I reading, or were you?
You were. I think you were here.
Most of these new leaders, many of whom we call the church fathers, note these are not the apostles. These are not first century people. These are 3rd, 4th century people. Had to read and interpret what eventually became known as the New Testament collection, which was originally authored by Christ following Israelites. That's why we refer to it as the apostolic writings as opposed to the New Testament. I understand what they're trying to do by using the term New Testament, but it just fosters the idea of, well, the Old Testament doesn't have anything to do with this now because we've got these new laws to.
The other interesting thing about that word New Testament, you've got to do a research on this Hebrew word new, and it derives from the word Kodesh. Well, what is our understanding of Kodesh? And so what happens each month? So each month at the beginning, we call it a new month, but the moon isn't a new moon. I mean, the old moon didn't blow up and a new moon get created. It's a renewed moon. So this word Chodesh has the basic root understanding of something being renewed. There's a passage in the Tanakh, one of the prophets says that God is going to give us a new heart. That's the word Kodesh again. Does that mean he's going to tear this heart out and he's going to put a brand new heart in that I didn't have before? No, it means this heart's going to be renewed because the Torah is going to be written on it. So it's renewed, it's refreshed. And so that's what this New Testament is. It's a refreshed testament. How is it refreshed? Because we have a different priest presiding over it, and we don't have the law of sin and death working in our members anymore.
Amen.
That's the difference. The only difference.
Yeah, it's such a joy for me to have someone here who's basically has
Singing
a
the
very
same
similar,
tune.
very similar song as myself. It really is fun. So anyway, yikes. They were not familiar with its original Jewish setting at all. Given these circumstances, the enormous challenge of interpreting these sacred scriptures, which lost their once Jewish origins and setting, led to the tragic mistaken trajectory of the new community in the Jesus movement to an almost entirely non-Israelite frame of reference. Of course, we're talking about the church, what comes forth as the church. The example of Polycarp, who was discipled by Jewish Yohanan, the most likely author of the Gospel of John, should not be dismissed but critically considered. When I've taught the Gospel of Yohanan, I've shared with everybody that it's likely that Yohanan didn't author the Gospel himself. It was his disciples who wanted his teaching to continue that compiled it, because it's unlikely that Yohanan would have said about himself, "I'm the one that Yeshua loved." That would have been somebody else. It would have been a violation of Torah for him to brag on himself in such a manner. And so I believe firmly that whether it was Polycarp or whether it was other disciples that actually compiled his teachings, they didn't have to write new teachings. They compiled his teachings. So it is the Gospel of Yohanan in that sense. It's probably not likely that he authored it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So that should not be dismissed, but critically considered. There are many kinds of misconceptions and anachronisms that are present in the common and usually unchallenged account of what took place in the city of Smyrna with the martyrdom of Polycarp. Smyrna was one of the 7 cities, the 7 Messianic communities.
Churches.
So when he was offered life in exchange for a public denial of Yeshua and acceptance of the Roman emperor as Caesar, he uttered his now iconic words, 86 years have I served him, and he has never done me wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king and my savior? The story of Polycarp's martyrdom, though being one of the great stories that inspired millions of Christians for greater commitment to the Lord, may not be historical at its most at most points. At the very least, its authenticity is significantly weakened by the lack of earlier sources. The earliest manuscripts are dated to the 10th century AD and come across as containing many inspirational Christian interpolations. This becomes clear when the story of the martyrdom of Polycarp is compared to the account as told by Eusebius in his church history, which was written in the 5th century, some 5 centuries earlier. The differences are considerable. There are other issues such as literary parallels with the Passion of Christ that are doubtfully coincidental. You want to take it?
Moreover, the 5th century CE, the Christ followers had already developed what could be called historic non-Jewish and often anti-Jewish Christianity. Therefore, it is doubtful that documents coming from the quills of 5th century Christian historians, such as Eusebius, should be completely trusted, especially when they involve the Jews. My point here is not that the totality of Eusebius' account of the martyrdom of Polycarp is false, but that we simply do not have ideologically independent and reliable sources to establish the details of the martyrdom, especially those that involve the Jews of Smyrna, and the claims of the document that they led the way and encouraged the murder of St. Polycarp. It is, in fact, more likely that this detail, Jews in the Polycarp account, was inserted into the early true account based on a misreading of the persecution of Christ's followers by those who falsely claimed to be Jews in the book of Revelation, Revelation 2:9. The accuracy of Eusebius' account has often been called into question, both today and in antiquity. For example, in the 5th century, the Christian historian Socrates Scholasticus described Eusebius as writing for rhetorical flourish and for the phrase of the emperor, or praises of the emperor, rather than the accurate statement of facts. So that's found in Socrates Scholasticus church history. The historical methods of Eusebius have been criticized by many scholars and show that at least his chronology was something between an exact science and an instrument of the by now Christian Roman imperial propaganda. My suggestion, therefore, is to leave the story of the dating and the authenticity of these materials to the scholars of latter periods and not allow the accounts of Polycarp, whether they are true or false or only partially so, to interfere with our readings of earlier, well-attested New Testament documents.
I think this might be a good place for us
Okay.
to break. So why don't we take some questions, if any of you have some, or comments, and then we'll wrap up. Everybody good? Did you enjoy?
Anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions?
I just had one question.
Okay, Kitty?
Okay.
I somehow failed to get down the scripture reference on where Yeshua gave the spiritual authority to those who bear fruit rather than the Sanhedrin. Where is that?
Matthew 21. Well, we could just go there.
Here,
I
can
have
pull
a
it up
Bible.
right here.
I have a Bible around here
I'll pull it
somewhere.
up for you here on the. We've got technology working for us here.
Amen. And I don't have to run it. Isn't that great news for all of you?
So your reference. So you've got
It's
both.
towards
We won't be using the Hebrew here, but it's Matthew what?
21. And it's probably about midway through the chapter, I'm guessing.
They don't like that. That. Cool. Okay. All right. So
Or you want to read it to us in the Greek?
wouldn't that be? I would love to be able to do that. So just so you know, when I put my cursor on the English word, it highlights the Greek word. And so I can go over and give you at the very bottom of the screen is the Greek definition, all of the tenses and moods of the word. And then if we want to look at it, I can triple click it and it'll bring up the definition in 3 or 4 lexicons. So those are at our disposal. So do you know where you're?
We need to go deeper into,
Okay.
I'm thinking it's around verse 23 maybe, but I'm not positive. We're getting close. Okay, we can start with Matthew 21:23, I think. When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him while he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you?" Let's see.
I'm going to make this bigger for them.
Okay. That's nice because it's bigger for us as well. Let's see. By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? Yeshua said to them, I will also ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of Yohanan was from What source? From heaven or from men? And they began reasoning among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say to us, then why do you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the people, for they all regard Yohanan as a prophet. In answering Yeshua, they said, we do not know. That was a good answer, really, for them in that particular situation. He also said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. So we're talking about spiritual authority here. But what do you think? Well, I think we can actually.
I'm gonna move this down so they can hear you a little bit better.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. I think we can go on a few verses. No, but this is about the vineyard. So I'm sorry. Yeah. So what do you think? A man has 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, son, go work today in the vineyard. And he answered, I will not. But afterward he regretted it and went. The man came to the second and said the same thing. And he answered, I will, sir, but he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father? They were catching on at this point. They said, the first. Yeshua said to them, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and the prostitutes will get into the kingdom of Elohim before you. For Yohanan came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes did believe him, and you, seeing this, did not even feel remorse afterward so as to believe him. Of course, Yeshua is referring to they didn't receive him as the Messiah. Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 through 19. Moshe warned them, if you don't receive the Messiah when he comes, you will stand in judgment. So listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard and put a wall around it and dug a winepress in it and built a tower and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey. When the harvest time approached, he sent his slaves to the vine growers to receive his produce. The vine growers took his slaves and beat one and killed another and stoned a third. Again, he sent another group of slaves larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. But afterward, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. They took him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Therefore, kind of a prophetic thing Yeshua was talking about here, wouldn't you say?
Yep.
Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine growers? They said to him, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end, and he will rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper seasons. Yeshua said to them, did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone? This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of Elohim will be taken away from you and given to a people producing the fruit of it. And of course, I believe he's referring to the disciples who will become his apostles. And he who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust.
So and I didn't quite hear all of your questions, so I'm glad that he did. But the thing here is what he's saying, just like the prodigal son. The prodigal son in this statement here is referring to the people of the northern kingdom that God had divorced, that had to come back. That prophecy goes all the way back to Deuteronomy 30. It's talked about in Solomon's dedication of the altar in the new temple, when it's prophesied that the divorced woman, the seed that had been scattered all across the earth, is going to be brought back. The prodigal son is all of us being brought back to the Torah again, brought back into the family. We're the fold of a different fold that has to be brought into which fold? Does Noahide fold? No, it's brought into the fold that's always been this fold from the very beginning, that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were all a part of. And so it's so awesome whenever you see these things and we can piece them together, that we're Israel. We're the all creation has longed for the revealing of us coming to this point of revelation and walking in his ways. We're bearing the fruit. We're the ones doing we're following the word wherever it goes. We're the faithful ones walking it out and not giving it up to something else that man made or man tossed in there. And by the way, I like it whenever you guys ask, where is that found? Everything that we say here, because we don't want to be led astray by man, I'm able and capable of bringing up the verifications for you to see exactly what we're talking about, because we don't want any miscommunication.
Amen. All right. We're not finished yet, but is that helping you, hopefully? So when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood he was speaking about them because they didn't receive him. They violated Torah. They violated Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 through 19. When they sought to seize him, they feared the people because they considered him to be a prophet. Yeshua spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who also gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent out his slaves to call those who had been invited to a wedding feast, and they were unwilling to come." So this is taking us into another parable that has somewhat the same message of being faithful until the end. Endure until the end.
Yes.
Amen. All right.
Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
Pastor,
Yes.
when they referring to nations, we're talking about Israel or the lost sheep of Israel and not the nations themselves.
Correct. So the interesting thing about that, though, is just as if we look at the Exodus example, the seed had been sown into Egypt, and in Egypt it produced a lot of fruit, a lot of offspring. And when God decided to harvest the seed out of Egypt, it brought other fruit along with the seed. So all of these other non-Hebrews join them. And so today we would say whether we are of Hebrew descent or not doesn't really matter. When we accept the terms of the covenant and recognize who Yeshua is and what he did, he nullified the divorce certificate so that we can come back in. You who were once far off, who were divorced and were exiled, you're now able to be brought near. You had no hope because there was no way you could come back into the kingdom because you had been divorced. There was no way for you to have entrance. Now, I'm your brother Benjamin. I'm your brother Naphtali. I'm your brother Ephraim, these apostles. And I'm telling you that the King of Kings, the Mashiach, has come and died and has given you entrance. And so now, all that believe like Ruth, whether they're natural or not, and here's the key thing, the apostles give us this real identifier. Here's the identifier. You'll know them by their fruit. If you're fruitful into the righteousness that God has sown, you're full-fledged Israelite. That's really the bottom line. If you're bearing fruit, you are of the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. There's no question about it.
And it's just great that you teach it very much like you guys have been hearing me teach it for years. And because it is, when somebody comes from more than 50 miles away, they're an expert. That's kind of how it works.
I have this slide, Harry, for you guys. I didn't know if we were going to get there or not, but he goes into this nations thing, and I prepared a little example for you guys on the promises that in the New Testament. There's a passage in the New Testament that says, but the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to bear my name before Gentiles and kings and the sons of Israel." And when you look at this piece of text, shall I show them?
Sure.
Okay. Let me make it small so that I can bring it over here into this other window.
Mark,
Yes.
that's okay. I understand. From when you were talking, I was thinking, or I was starting to think, well, he was meaning it's only to the lost sheep of Israel. That's why I questioned, but that's not what you meant.
No. I think they were predominantly going for the lost sheep, the descendants of the northern kingdom, but God knew that any time he sows the seed, those bearing fruit of righteousness amongst the world, there are people like Ruth, like Caleb, and the people in Egypt and surrounding nations. They're going to come in to the fold. It's all about who's willing to accept the covenant relationship. Who wants to be shepherded by the true God, the wonderful, loving, real shepherd that will take care of them. That's what it's about. And it doesn't matter whether you're Hebrew blood or not. We're through Messiah, we're brought in regardless, and our bearing of fruit is the proof. To our brother Judah, if we were to go over to Israel, according to the terms of the covenant, according to Torah, if we're bearing the fruit of righteousness, if we were in a law setting, there is no question we're part of the family. And I'm glad God set it up like a courtroom law setting. We're part of the family. There's just no question of it.
And you've experienced that, I know.
Yes.
And I've experienced it in Israel in a most unusual manner. The tour guide, I went with a group of pastors the first time in 2013, and the tour guide, who was not a religious Jew, and I witnessed to her, and of course, because I had an opportunity and was probably going to be the only time I would get that opportunity, and repeatedly over the course of the time I was there. And at the going away dinner that you always have on those types of trip, she came up to me and she said, "I love the way you wear your tzitzit, and you are truly a Jew." Now, I had been emphasizing to her all along that I am Israel. I am, the essence of the lost tribes, because they were immersed in the nations. And most people who live in Armenia or Italy or that have blood descendants of the tribes of Israel don't know it. And so we're all just this mixed bag of people, and the Spirit is calling on those who will believe regardless of what your background is.
Well, I wish I could get this thing over to you guys. It's quite a little piece that would help you see.
Well, maybe we could start with this next time.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah,
do that.
I can.
All right. Abba, Father, we bless you for your faithfulness, for your love for us, for your loving kindness and your long suffering. Father, we ask that you would give us wisdom, give us favor. We ask that you would help us to apply what we've gone over today, not just tuck it away in another file of information we've gathered, but that it would be a part of who we are. And so we bless you for, we bless Mark and his ministry and for his willingness to go out on a limb with me today. And we ask that you would bless all of the staff who have helped with this production. And we ask that you would bless those who are listening with the ability to apply it. And we pray these things in the name of our Messiah. May it be so. Amen.
This was a joy for me. So
It was
I
me
enjoy amongst those who are hungry for the word, and it's been a blessing. Thank you all for joining on with us.
All right. We'll see
This
you
was
tomorrow.
awesome. Thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow night.
you.
All right. Shalom, everyone.
Yes, thank you much.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom.